Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome again to Syriana Analysis. I'm your host, Almassian. Some people think the term aggression applies only when a country A uses physical violence, aka military power, on or against other countries. But what if I told you there is another act or another sort of action that superpowers or technically empires use to dominate the weaker countries, to subjugate them, and shape their policies to a direction that serve the interests of the empire, regardless of what serves the best interests of the people in the weaker countries. This act is called hegemony or hegemony, and it has 5 dimensions in the 21st century. First is political hegemony, second is military hegemony, third is economic hegemony, fourth is technological hegemony, and the fifth is cultural hegemony. Now, the hegemonic country or the absolute hegemonic country in the world after the fall of the Soviet Union is the United States, which uses its hegemonic power to, one, lead a number of allied nations under the umbrella of Washington, and two, to subjugate other nations to reach one of the two objectives. A, to either force them to become part of the US-led bloc and harmonize the policies in their internal policies, domestic policies, economic policies, etc., with of the United States. So the policies become harmonized with the interests of the United States. Or two, or B, when there is resistance, to destroy a nation's capacity to develop independently from the US monetary system. So in short, hegemony is defined as a state's political, economic, or military dominance or control over other nations, often supported by legitimating norms and ideas. And I would also argue that in the 21st century, also ideologies, especially coming from the United States, the neoliberal ideology on the rest of the world, and also in nowadays or in the 21st century, employing technology in the service of the hegemonic power. And the examples of that are many. For example, social media platforms are also being used by different security apparatuses to advance the interests of the establishment, whether it's in the United States or even abroad. For example, the United States argues that China uses TikTok to advance its policy in the United States. Also, Huawei, for example, technology has become an integral part in any empire's ability to continue as a hegemonic power, or other nations like their willingness to challenge the hegemonic power, also using the same political, economic, military, cultural, and technological means to challenge the empire. Why I'm giving you this context, because I just watched a video of the Eritrean president explaining eloquently in 4 minutes what he thinks of the US empire and why his country supports Russia and why they refuse to impose or to be part of the American empire, and why the United States is acting in an aggressive way or waging aggression on other countries through hegemony, which I found it very interesting, and I would like to share with you this video at the later stage of this video, so stay tuned for that to watch it together. But before that, I found a very interesting article on the page and the website of the Chinese Foreign Ministry. I will share with you. So, of course, this is the website of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the People's Republic of China. So, of course, you expect them to post an anti-American rhetoric. But in the details that I summarized, I find them pretty much in line with my convictions. And I believe that what they say about the America's intention to continue as a hegemonic power, or its work after the fall of the Soviet Union to become a hegemonic power and stay in this hegemonic status, is quite accurate. So as you can see, political hegemony, military hegemony, economic hegemony, technological hegemony, and cultural hegemony. And I will go through these different dimensions, and we see together that what is mentioned here is quite accurate. So in introduction, since becoming the world's most powerful country after the two world wars and the Cold War, the United States has acted more boldly to interfere in the internal affairs of other countries, pursue, maintain, and abuse hegemony, advance subversion and infiltration, and willfully wage wars, bringing harm to the international community. The United States has developed a hegemonic playbook to stage, quote, color revolutions, instigate regional disputes, and even directly launch wars under the guise of promoting democracy, freedom, and human rights. Clinging to the Cold War mentality, the United States has ramped up bloc politics and stoked conflicts and confrontation. It has overstretched the concept of national security, abused export controls, and forced unilateral sanctions upon others. It has taken a selective approach to international law and rules, utilizing or discarding them as it sees fit, and has sought to impose rules that serve its own interests in the name of upholding a rules-based international order. So if you want to start with the first dimension, the political hegemony, the United States has long been attempting to mold other countries and the world order with its own values and political system in the name of promoting democracy and human rights. Instances of U.S. interference in other countries' internal affairs abound. In the name of promoting democracy, the United States practiced a neo-Monroe doctrine in Latin America, instigated color revolutions in Eurasia, and orchestrated the Arab Spring in West Asia and North Africa, bringing chaos and disaster to many countries. I find it very interesting that they consider the Arab Spring is orchestrated by the United States, which is something I personally trying to still understand whether the United States has orchestrated it or managed the outcome of it. And the Chinese believe that the Arab Spring was orchestrated by the United States, which means the revolutions, the so-called revolutions in Tunisia, in Libya, in Egypt, and in Syria were orchestrated by the United States, according to the Foreign Ministry of China. The policies of successive U.S. governments toward Latin America and the Caribbean region have been riddled with political interference, military intervention, and regime subversion. From its 61-year hostility toward and blockade of Cuba to its overthrow of the Allende government of Chile, U.S. policy in this region has been built on one maxim: those who submit will prosper. Those who resist shall perish. So in short, those who submit to the will of the United States, they will prosper in Latin America, and those who resist shall perish. And this doesn't only apply in Latin America, but for the rest of the world. The US exercises double standards on international rules, placing its self-interest first. The United States has walked away from international treaties and organizations and put its domestic law above international law. The United States, for example, quit UNESCO twice in 1984 and 2017. And it announces its exit from the UN Human Rights Council, citing the organization's, quote, bias against Israel. As the only country in possession of a chemical weapons stockpile, the United States has repeatedly delayed the destruction of chemical weapons and remained reluctant in fulfilling its obligations. It has become the biggest obstacle to realizing a world free of chemical weapons. Of course, while they speak about the non-existent chemical weapons of Syria, which they themselves destroyed in 2013, and then still accusing Syria of using chemical weapons, which raises the question, where did these chemical weapons come from if it's been used in Syria, right? The US arbitrarily passes judgment on democracy in other countries and fabricates a false narrative of, quote, democracy versus authoritarianism to incite estrangement, division, rivalry, and confrontation. So this was the political part, or the political hegemony of the United States. I just summarized some parts of it. Now we go to the military hegemony. The history of the United States is characterized by violence and expansion. Since it gained independence in 1776, the United States has constantly sought expansion by force. It slaughtered Indians, invaded Canada, waged a war against Mexico, instigated the American-Spanish War, and annexed Hawaii. After World War II, the wars either provoked or launched by the United States included the Korean War, the Vietnam War, the Gulf War, the Kosovo War, the war in Afghanistan, the Iraq War, the Libyan War, and the Syrian War, abusing its military hegemony to pave the way for expansionist objectives. In recent years, the US average annual military budget has exceeded 700 billion US dollars, which will become, by the way, guys, $1 trillion next year. Accounting for 40% of the world's total, more than the 15 countries behind it combined. The United States has about 800 overseas military bases with 173,000 troops deployed in 159 countries. Wow. 159 countries, guys. The United States has 800 military bases around the world with 173,000 troops. It's like the same amount of the Syrian armed forces inside of Syria. Wow. According to the book America Invades, how we have invaded or been militarily involved with almost every country on earth, the United States has fought or been militarily involved with almost all the 990 odd countries recognized by the United Nations, with only 3 exceptions. The 3 countries were spared because the United States didn't find them on the map. This is quite funny. It could be one of these islands, in the oceans. US military hegemony has caused humanitarian tragedies. Since 2001, the wars and military operations launched by the United States in the name of fighting terrorism have claimed over 900,000 lives, with some 335,000 of them civilians. So 1/4 of them or 1/3 of them are civilians. Injured millions and displaced tens of millions. The 2003 Iraq War resulted in some between 200 to 250,000 civilian deaths, including over 16,000 directly killed by the US military and left more than 1 million homeless. The United States has created 37 million refugees around the world. Since 2012, the number of Syrian refugees alone has increased tenfold. This is something I always spoke about, guys, since I moved in Germany. People were all sympathetic. They say, yeah, refugees welcome and everything. They show so much sympathy towards the refugees at the beginning. And I said, yeah, that's nice, but how about we stop creating refugee crisis at the first place? And I was accused of being a fascist and self-hating Syrian for saying that. Why would you like to help someone after he comes to your country when you can help them to stay in their own country and not create a refugee crisis at the first place, right? I don't understand what's so controversial about that statement. The United States has also adopted appalling methods in war. During the Korean War, the Vietnam War, the Gulf War, the Kosovo War, the war in Afghanistan, and the Iraq War, the United States used massive quantities of chemical and biological weapons, as well as cluster bombs, fuel air bombs, graphite bombs, and depleted uranium bombs, causing enormous damage on civilian facilities, countless civilian casualties, and lasting environmental pollution. We just highlight this because we have now in 3 is the economic hegemony. After World War II, the United States led efforts to set up the Bretton Woods system, the International Monetary Fund, and the World Bank, which together with the Marshall Plan formed the international monetary system centered around the US dollar. By taking advantage of the dollar's status as the major international reserve currency, the United States is basically collecting seigniorage from around the world. I think it means profits. And using its control over international organization, it coerces other countries into serving America's political and economic strategy. The United States exploits the world's wealth with the help of, I want to Google this word really. I'm now very interested to know what's the meaning of it. It owns, and seigniorage. Okay. It's seigniorage, which means owns. The United States exploits the world's wealth with the help of seigniorage or owns. It costs only about 17 cents to produce $100 bill, but other countries had to pony up $100 of actual goods in order to obtain one. It was pointed out more than half a century ago that the United States enjoyed exorbitant privilege and deficit without tears created by its dollars, and use the worthless paper note to plunder the resources of factories of other nations. Technological hegemony. We're going to finish it, guys. Just technological hegemony and cultural hegemony. I summarized a lot. I have read a lot. It took me like an hour to read this article and summarize it for you so that we can go through it in 10 minutes. The United States seeks to deter other countries' scientific, technological, and economic development by wielding monopoly power, suppression measures, and technology restrictions in high-tech fields. The United States monopolizes intellectual property in the name of protection, taking advantage of the weak position of the other countries, especially developing ones, on intellectual property rights and the institutional vacancy in relevant fields. The United States reaps excessive profits through monopoly. The United States politicizes, weaponizes technological issues, and uses them as ideological tools. Overstretching the concept of national security, the United States mobilizes state power to suppress and sanction Chinese company Huawei, restricted the entry of Huawei products into the US market, cut off its supply of chips and operating systems, and coerced other countries to ban Huawei from undertaking local 5G network construction. It even talked Canada into unwarrantedly detaining Huawei's CFO Meng Wanzhou for nearly 3 years. The United States solidifies its technological monopoly in the name of protecting democracy by building small blocks on technology such as the CHIPS Alliance and Clean Network. The United States has put democracy and human rights labels on high technology and turned technological issues into political and ideological issues, so as to fabricate excuses for its technological blockade against other countries. In May 2019, the United States enlisted 32 countries to the Prague 5G Security Conference in the Czech Republic and issued the Prague Proposal in an attempt to exclude China's 5G products. The United States abuses its technological hegemony by carrying out cyber attacks and eavesdropping. I think all the countries does. China even does this. Russia does this too. The United States has long been notorious as an empire of hackers, blamed for its rampant acts of cyber theft around the world. It has all kinds of means to enforce pervasive cyber attacks and surveillance, including using analog base stations like signals to access mobile phones for data theft, manipulating mobile apps, infiltrating cloud servers, and stealing through undersea cables. US surveillance is indiscriminate. All can be targets of its surveillance, be they rivals or allies. Even leaders of allied countries such as former German Chancellor Angela Merkel and several French presidents, and this was proven to be accurate, and the Germans have nothing about it. In Germany, there are probably thousands of NSA workers, CIA agents, and they are all spying on anything and everything, taping the telecommunications, SMS, WhatsApp, everything. They're reading everything. They're just recording everything, reading everything, translating them, and checking them for keywords, and to see what's happening, whether it's in terms of in political field or in other fields. The last one, guys, cultural hegemony. It's very exciting, this part as well. The global expansion of American culture is an important part of its external strategy. The United States has often used cultural tools to strengthen and maintain its hegemony in the world. The United States embeds American values in its products, such as movies. American values and lifestyle are a tied product to its movies and TV shows, publications, media content, and programs by the government-funded nonprofit cultural institutions. It thus shapes a cultural and public opinion space in which American culture reigns and maintains cultural hegemony. There are various vehicles the United States uses to keep its cultural hegemony. American movies are the most used. They now occupy more than 70% of the world's market share. The United States skillfully exploits its cultural diversity to appeal to various ethnicities. When Hollywood movies descend to the world, they scream the American values tied to them. American cultural hegemony not only shows itself in direct intervention, but also in media infiltration and as a trumpet for the world. US-dominated Western media has a particularly important role in shaping global public opinion in favor of US meddling in the internal affairs of other countries. The US government strictly censors all social media companies and demands their obedience. Twitter CEO Elon Musk admitted in 2022 that all social media platforms work with the US government to censor content. Last two paragraphs. The United States practices double standards on the freedom of the press. It brutally suppresses and silences media of other countries by various means. The United States and Europe bar mainstream Russian media. The United States and Europe bar mainstream Russian media, such as Russia Today and the Sputnik from their countries. Platforms such as Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube openly restrict official accounts of Russia. Netflix, Apple, and Google have removed Russian channels and applications from their services and app stores. Unprecedented draconian censorship is imposed on Russia-related contents. I mean, it is coming also to the Chinese content soon, believe me. The United States abuses its cultural hegemony to instigate peaceful evolution in socialist countries. It sets up news media and cultural outfits targeting socialist countries. It pours staggering amount of public funds into radio and TV networks to support their ideological infiltration. And these mouthpieces bombard socialist countries in dozens of languages with inflammatory propaganda day and night. Guys, this was very, very, very interesting in my opinion. I hope you stayed with me till the end of this article because it's very important. I really put so much effort in reading it and summarizing it for you. And it's very important for the audiences who would like to learn something new or would like to solidify their convictions and arguments and intellectual capacity when it comes to the American imperialism and being an empire, and try to understand what are the pillars that the US empire is standing on in order to stay as an empire and challenge other countries and try to destroy their progress to become also, whether it's regional countries such as Iran or international powers such as China and Russia. Now, since all this introduction was about Eritrean president who gave an interview to Sputnik, first of all, this is guys Eritrea, as you can see. And Eritrea is a very important country, geographically speaking, and Djibouti and Eritrea are very important, in my opinion. And they, there is a huge amount of global trade comes from the Gulf of Aden and passes through Djibouti and Eritrea to the Red Sea. So business-wise, trade-wise, Eritrea and Djibouti and Yemen are extremely important. That is why you can see non-stop conflicts are being unfortunately triggered in these countries by different powers in order to have dominance over these countries. Now, I will play the video of the president of, let's see if it works like this. Yeah, it works. So I think it's very interesting to see what the Eritrean president says in this regard after all this explanation about the hegemony and hegemonic status of the United States. Let's take a look.
Eritrea was among the countries that abstained from voting the United Nations General Assembly resolution on condemning Russian actions. In 2022, Eritrea condemned the sanctions imposed on Russia. Do you feel pressure from the West for your position? And do you detect any pressure in relation to certain projects of cooperation with Russia?
There is a problem here. We did not abstain. We were against the imposition of sanctions against the Russian Federation. It's not because we are doing any favor to the Russian Federation. This is war declared on Russia, led by Washington and NATO. So it's very clear, it's a very simple thing. And as I indicated earlier, this war was declared 30 years ago, probably. During after the end of the Cold War, this idea of hegemony came, control everything, influence the world, divide the world into areas of influence. And it's not only expanding influence. It was a declaration of war because there was a concept developed by these guys to contain those who can compete, or at least who can share something in the global scene. That was not allowed. And because of the background of the Cold War era, this obsession of containing Russia was there for the last 30 years. It's nothing new. If you are containing one nation not to grow, not to compete, not to be able to make its contributions, then you are declaring war. I wouldn't be sitting here waiting for someone to contain me with sanctions, with obstructions, with the confusion, all sorts of things. This is a declaration of war. And we had our position very clear, not yesterday or the day before, but we said this is not the kind of all world order that the peoples of all continents need. Nobody needs this kind of policies, hegemony, control, and not allow people to grow and work hard to change their quality of life. This idea of war in Ukraine or war between the Russian Federation and Ukraine is not true at all. This is war declared by NATO and Washington against the Russian Federation for the last 30 years. This has been going on and on and on for the last 30 years. How can you contain Russia? Not enable Russia to economically compete, not enable Russia to compete in technology, not allow Russia to compete in industries, not allow Russia to even have influence everywhere. If you have declared this war, then the war is there. It's not a war between Russia and Ukraine. For that matter, our position was clear. We were against this so-called global order or world order. We've been victims of these sanctions. It's not big nations or not powerful nations like Russia, China, or anybody else, but even those who don't bow or kneel down to this ideology of hegemony will have to be punished. Sanctions. This declaration of war will have to end. This is not a war from between Russia and Ukraine. This is a war declared by NATO, led by Washington, and Russia has the right to defend itself, not alone. It's not an isolated Russian case. This is a global issue, and we need an order, a global order or a world order that enables everybody to share, cooperate. Complementarity will have to be there. You can't contain someone, you can't contain one nation, you can't force or even use force, all sorts of coercion to subdue nations. This is not acceptable.
First of all, my first comment would be he explained hegemony and what happened after World War II very eloquently. I really suspect that there are many leaders around the world, especially in the Western world, who can and could explain it in such an eloquent way in their second or third languages, let alone in their first languages. I doubt that even in their first languages. He says this war was declared by NATO, led by Washington and Russia, because they tried to contain Russia after after the Cold War, which means the expansion of NATO to the borders with Russia in order to block the Russian access to the former Soviet Union countries and convert them into anti-Russian satellite states. He says today the Western approach of containing Russia has led to the Ukrainian crisis, which is nothing more than a war declared by NATO, led by Washington. He says there is not a war between Russia and Ukraine. This is a war declared by NATO, led by Washington, and Russia has the right to defend itself, not alone. It's not an isolated Russia. This is a global issue. And he speaks about the so-called containment policy of the United States, which basically means, for example, the United States owns the means of the productions, the materials, has a monopoly over them, over so many sort of materials, and blocks other countries to access these materials in order to advance their technologies or to build their industries and manufacturing power, etc. And then when there is a country trying to build an independent economy, independent from the US dollar or the US monetary system, such as in Iran. They impose sanctions on this country. They try to hold back the development of this country, especially on the economic level. It's complete, in my opinion, hegemony. It's a practice of hegemony over the world. So you're either with us or against us. If you are with us, you have to harmonize your relations in a way that it serves our interests, regardless of your people's interests. And if it coincides sometimes with the interests of the people and the interests of the United States, this country flourishes. But most of the time, the interests of the United States doesn't coincide with the interests of the interests of the people in different regions of the world. So these countries, if they resist, or these nations, when they resist, they will be pushed back, they will be fought against, they will be contained, and sanctions will be imposed on them under different pretexts, democracy, human rights, and so these countries stay behind, and these countries cannot develop because the United States first owns the means of the production, it owns the basic materials, it has a monopoly over different technologies, and also it has a monopoly over the monetary system around the world. So how can you compete under such circumstances? And I would argue that when the United States does this is a declaration of war. It's a soft war. It's a different type of warfare, and it is practiced on tens of countries around the world to hold them back and to keep them in their places, in Cuba, in Syria, in Iran, in Afghanistan. They hold $8 billion from their billion or trillion, I don't know, from their central bank money. China, Russia, any country that wants to challenge, or not even challenge, want to have independent economic system, right? The United States considers that challenging, so they come after them. So yes, it's a declaration of war. Just last thing, guys, before we leave, because we spoke about Eritrea, I found this very interesting article, the strategic partnership between Eritrea and Russia, why Russia is trying to have better relations now with Eritrea. In this extremely poor Eritrea nation, located in the Horn of Africa with a populated 3.6 million people, what factors could attract to strengthen cooperation in the spheres highlighted by the Russian President Vladimir Putin during a meeting with President of the State of Eritrea, Isaias Afwerki, at the Kremlin? Russia is attracted to its highly strategic location, as I mentioned to you guys, and I show you on the map. Eritrea is bordered to the northeast and east by the Red Sea, Sudan to the west, Ethiopia to the south, and Djibouti to the southeast. The main significance, as stressed during the meeting, was trade and economic relations, which deserve primary attention. From our studies, agriculture makes up 11% of the wider economy's value and is the main economic activity in Eritrea. In 2013, the pickup in growth had been attributed to the commencement of full operations in the gold and silver Bisha mined by Canada Nevsun Resources, the production of the cement from the cement factory in Massawa, and investment in Eritrea's copper and zinc. Chinese are very active in the mining sector, and the Australians operate Koluli potash mining. In 2020, the IMF estimated Eritrea's GDP at 2.1 billion. With that economic background, however, Russia sees an opportunity to develop trade and economic ties between the two countries. The trade turnover between Russia and Eritrea in 2022 amounted to $13.5 million, including $11.5 million from wheat exports, according to materials from the talks between Putin and Isaias Afwerki in the Kremlin. According to the statement, Eritrea is highly interested in strengthening ties with Ural Automobile Plant and Kamaz. Those are Russian companies. In 2018, Kamaz delivered 56 cars and 5 buses valued around $5 million to Eritrea. Isaias Afwerki believes that Russia was the primary competitor and rival of the policy of encirclement and containment by the forces of domination from the early 1990s, and its global impact in the past 30 years was considerable indeed. Russia, too, didn't undertake at the outset all the necessary preparations for effective resistance. An integrated and comprehensive strategy of resistance was not accordingly set in motion. By but with time, and as the latent policy of containment against China becomes more transparent, international awareness of the free peoples has increased. It is important to remind here that Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov visited Eritrea in January 2023. He said the agenda for Russia-Eritrea cooperation has a key focus on the implementation of potential joint projects, including the logistic hub of Asmara. Afwerki has been president since 1993 when Eritrea gained independence from Ethiopia. He is the first and the only person to hold the post so far. Sergei Lavrov visited Eritrea in January as he toured Africa, and they spoke about the commercial activities. Lavrov spoke extensively about economic cooperation. According to him, Russia's truck maker Kamaz was already working in Eritrea, supplying its products to the country, as was Gazprom Bank Global Resources, which was building cooperation in the banking center. Still, the same year, Eritrea was interested in opening a Russian language department at one of the universities at the capital country of Asmara. But before that, I think this is important. The same year, 2018, concrete talks were held to build a logistics center at the port of Eritrea that makes world-class logistics and services hub for maritime transportation through the Suez Canal, and definitely set to promote bilateral relations. In April 2022, Eritrea's top diplomat Osman Saleh made a reciprocal visit to Moscow to receive an honor and congratulations for opposing resolution in New York. That was in March 2022. Eritrea was one of the countries who voted against a resolution condemning Russia over the situation in Ukraine and the United Nations. Yeah, I think this video was a little bit long and there are so many details in it, but I still find it very interesting for us to understand why different African countries are opposing American hegemony. Some of them in terms of statements, but some of them are in terms of actions. And now they are having better relations with Russia. And historically speaking, they see Russia also as a force of anti-imperialist force in Africa by the Europeans and by the Americans. So that history also plays an important role in the collective consciousness of the people there. But also there are many politicians and leaders in Africa. They are willing to keep and increase the relations with Russia. As you remember, a few days ago, there was the BRICS summit in South Africa, and South Africa issued an immunity for Russian officials, those who want to visit South Africa, even though South Africa is part of the Rome Statute, which means it's part of the ICC, and despite that, they don't want to follow now, and they can see the potentials of Russia and China in this regard. And I'm not saying that Russia and China are saints, right? But I'm saying that these countries who have been victims for American imperialism and for the American imperialistic policies in the past decades, who have been suffering a lot, and their natural resources have been taken away indiscriminately and brutally, and they weren't even compensated, right? Not for the colonial era and not for the neo-colonial era, because some people think that the colonial era is over. No. And you can see it clearly in the minds and the statements of many Western politicians. You know that these people are infected with imperialism, and they are speaking from an imperialist mindset and position, trying to impose their worldview on the rest of the world. And they think the world is just about Western Europe and the United States and Canada. But if you go to the rest of the world, the vast majority of the world, they speak like the Eritrean president. And I'm not only talking about the leaders and the politicians, but the people as well. And I advise anyone who lives in such a bubble to try to understand what other people say, and why do they not support Ukraine? Why do they support today Russia and China? Although Russia and China could also come and replace these colonial powers, I'm saying maybe, I don't know, but the recent experiences show that Russia and China aren't willing to wage wars on other countries and subjugate them in order to harmonize their policies with the interests of Moscow and Beijing. Instead, these two countries are willing to cooperate and have a fair share of any projects and cooperation economic or trade, etc., between these two countries. So what do you think, guys, of hegemony? What do you think of the statements of the Eritrean president? Do you agree with him? Do you disagree with him? Do you think he was biased or he was throwing truth bombs? Let me know your opinions in the comments below. I've been your host, Almassian of Syriana Analysis. If you're new, please subscribe, click on the subscribe button, guys. 70% of you are not even subscribers to Syriana Analysis watching my channel. And hit the like button, share it with your friends, and if please also become a patron, which helps me create a better content and post educational videos like this in a more quality way. The link in the description below, and see you next time.